What if I told you that the soldier who ended one of the longest military sieges in recent history was declared mentally unfit for duty just 8 months earlier? This is the story of Staff Sergeant Emma Rodriguez, whose single precision shot changed the course of an entire war, proving that sometimes what command sees as a dangerous liability is actually the exact weapon they need most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez learned to shoot before she learned to drive. Growing up in Riverside, Texas, where the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and coyotes were a constant threat to her family's small ranch, precision wasn't just a skill, it was survival. Her father, Miguel, worked double shifts at the local auto repair shop, while her mother, Carmen, taught 3rd grade at the town's only elementary school. Money was always tight, but Miguel had managed to save enough for one luxury: a weathered Winchester rifle that had belonged to his grandfather. Every evening after homework, Emma would join her father behind their modest house, where he'd set up tin cans and bottles at increasingly impossible distances. What started as pest control training quickly became something extraordinary. By age 12, Emma could hit a dime at 200 yards. By 15, she was out shooting grown men at the county fair, earning prize money that helped keep the family afloat during Miguel's lean months at the shop. Carmen worried about her daughter's obsession with marksmanship, fearing it was too aggressive for a young woman. But Miguel saw something deeper in Emma's focus, a mathematical precision that went beyond simple hand-eye coordination. She didn't just aim and fire. She calculated wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, even the rotation of the earth for longer shots. She treated each bullet like a surgical instrument, understanding that true marksmanship was more art than aggression. When Emma turned 18, the family's financial situation had worsened. Miguel's back problems from years of mechanical work meant fewer hours, and Carmen's teaching salary barely covered their basic needs. The military recruiters who visited Riverside High School painted pictures of education benefits, steady pay, and career advancement. But for Emma, the decision went deeper than economics. She'd grown up watching news coverage of overseas conflicts, seeing how imprecise military actions led to civilian casualties. She believed that someone with her skills could make a difference, that precision could save lives rather than simply take them. The recruitment process revealed just how exceptional Emma's abilities were. At the local military entrance processing station, she scored perfect marks on every marksmanship assessment. The recruiting sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Bill Santos, had been processing recruits for 15 years and had never seen anything like Emma's natural shooting ability. He immediately flagged her file for advanced placement, recommending her for the Army's elite precision training program at Fort Whitman, Colorado. Fort Whitman sat nestled in the Rocky Mountains, a sprawling complex designed to produce the military's most skilled marksmen and snipers. The program was legendarily selective, accepting only 24 candidates annually from thousands of applicants worldwide. Its reputation was built on producing soldiers capable of impossible shots under extreme conditions, the kind of precision that could change the outcome of entire operations with a single well-placed bullet. The program was overseen by Colonel James Mitchell, a career officer with 32 years of service and a philosophy rooted in unwavering military tradition. Mitchell had earned his reputation during 2 tours in Iraq, where his by-the-book approach to tactical operations had resulted in numerous successful missions. His training methodology emphasized discipline, conformity, and absolute adherence to established protocols. In Mitchell's view, the modern military had no room for improvisation or individual interpretation of tactical doctrine. Mitchell's assistant, Master Sergeant Tony Brooks, had been running the day-to-day training operations for 8 years. Brooks was a loyal subordinate who had internalized Mitchell's rigid approach completely. Together, They had created a program culture that prized mechanical precision over intuitive adaptation, viewing any deviation from established procedures as a fundamental character flaw rather than innovative thinking. Emma arrived at Fort Whitman on a crisp October morning, carrying everything she owned in a single military-issued duffel bag. The other 23 candidates were already assembled in the main briefing hall, and Emma immediately noticed she was one of only 2 women in the program. The demographics weren't surprising. Elite military marksmanship had always been male-dominated, but the atmosphere felt distinctly unwelcoming. During the initial orientation, Colonel Mitchell addressed the assembled candidates with the stern authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. His steel-gray eyes swept methodically across each face, lingering noticeably longer on Emma and the other female candidate, Corporal Lisa Harper, who had transferred from an Army intelligence unit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mitchell began, his voice carrying the weight of decades in command positions. "This program exists to forge the military's most precise and reliable marksmen. We are not training cowboys or lone wolves. We are developing soldiers who can integrate seamlessly into complex tactical operations while maintaining the highest standards of military discipline and psychological stability." The emphasis on certain phrases wasn't lost on Emma. Mitchell continued outlining the grueling months ahead: dawn to dusk training sessions, psychological evaluations designed to identify mental weakness, and shooting exercises that would push human limitations. The program's 68% failure rate wasn't a statistic to be improved. It was a feature designed to eliminate anyone who couldn't conform to Mitchell's exacting standards. That first night in the barracks, Emma lay awake listening to her fellow candidates discuss their backgrounds. Most came from military families with generations of service. Sergeant Derek Walsh, whose grandfather had been a decorated sniper in Vietnam and whose father currently served as a Pentagon liaison, dominated the conversations with stories of family military traditions and connections throughout the defense establishment. Derek had noticed Emma during orientation and made several comments about women in combat roles that rode the edge between professional concern and outright dismissal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His remarks were always delivered with a practiced smile and just enough plausible deniability to avoid direct confrontation. But the underlying message was clear. He questioned whether women possess the psychological fortitude necessary for precision combat roles. Emma had no family military legacy to share, no connections to leverage, no stories of generational service to offer. She had only her exceptional skill and an unwavering belief that precision marksmanship could be a force for protection rather than destruction. But already, she could sense the weight of expectations, not that she would succeed, but that she would validate their existing assumptions about who belonged in elite military programs. The first major assessment came during the program's 3rd week: long-range precision shooting under simulated combat conditions. Emma had been anticipating this moment since her arrival, knowing it would be her opportunity to demonstrate the abilities that had brought her to Fort Whitman. The exercise was designed to test not just shooting accuracy, but decision-making under pressure and the ability to adapt to changing tactical situations. The scenario involved multiple targets at varying distances, some representing enemy combatants and others representing civilians or friendly forces. Candidates had to make split-second decisions about which targets to engage, while maintaining perfect accuracy under artificial stress conditions created by loud noises, smoke, and time pressure. Emma's turn came on a Wednesday afternoon, with Master Sergeant Brooks observing and Colonel Mitchell monitoring from the Tactical Operations Center. As she settled into her shooting position, Emma felt the familiar calm that had served her since childhood. The chaos of the simulated combat environment faded into background noise as she focused on the mathematical precision required for each shot. The exercise presented 12 different scenarios over 45 minutes. Emma's performance was flawless. She correctly identified every legitimate target, avoided every civilian decoy, and placed every shot with surgical precision. Her accuracy rate was 100%, and her decision-making time was consistently faster than program averages. She had performed exactly as the situation demanded, adapting to each scenario's unique requirements while maintaining perfect tactical discipline. When Emma completed the exercise and returned to the debriefing area, she felt the familiar satisfaction that came from technical mastery executed under pressure. Several fellow candidates offered genuine congratulations, recognizing the exceptional level of skill they had witnessed. Even Derek Walsh seemed grudgingly impressed, though he carefully avoided direct praise. Master Sergeant Brooks recorded Emma's scores with professional neutrality, but Emma caught a brief expression of surprise when he reviewed her accuracy statistics. Everything about the exercise suggested that Emma had not only met the program's standards but had exceeded them by significant margins. However, when Colonel Mitchell emerged from the Tactical Operations Center for the formal debriefing, his expression carried the same skeptical calculation Emma had noticed during orientation. He stood before the assembled candidates with the bearing of someone about to deliver an uncomfortable but necessary lesson. "Rodriguez," Mitchell called out, his voice cutting through the afternoon mountain air with military precision. "That was quite a performance out there." Emma straightened to attention, uncertain whether his tone indicated approval or criticism. "Thank you, sir." "Too quite," Mitchell continued, his expression hardening. "This isn't a shooting gallery, Rodriguez. We're training military marksmen, not sharpshooters looking to impress an audience. Your decision-making process showed excessive individualism and insufficient regard for established tactical protocols." The words struck Emma like a physical blow. She had followed every protocol, exceeded every standard, and made decisions that maximized mission success while minimizing civilian risk. Around her, she could see fellow candidates exchanging uncertain glances, some sympathetic, others relieved they weren't facing Mitchell's criticism. "Sir, I maintained all safety parameters and followed established engagement rules throughout the exercise," Emma said, keeping her voice steady despite the confusion and growing anger building in her chest. Mitchell's expression remained unchanged. "Are you questioning my tactical assessment, Rodriguez?" The question hung in the mountain air like a trap. Emma realized that this moment was about more than her performance in a single exercise. Speaking up would label her as insubordinate and unwilling to accept legitimate criticism. Staying silent would mean accepting an unfair evaluation that contradicted objective evidence. "No, sir," Emma finally said, the words feeling bitter and wrong as they left her mouth. As the weeks progressed, Emma found herself subjected to an increasingly evident double standard. Every shooting exercise was dissected for evidence of recklessness or poor judgment, regardless of her actual performance. When she shot conservatively, following textbook procedures exactly, Mitchell criticized her lack of tactical initiative. When she adapted to changing scenarios using innovative approaches, she was labeled as unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Her fellow candidates began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone clearly marked for failure by the program's leadership. The isolation was particularly painful because Emma genuinely respected many of her peers and had hoped to build the kind of brotherhood she'd heard veterans describe. The situation reached a crisis point during a team-based tactical exercise designed to simulate real-world sniper operations. Emma had been paired with Derek Walsh for a mission requiring coordinated precision, shooting to neutralize multiple threats while protecting civilian populations. The exercise took place in a mock urban environment constructed specifically for advanced tactical training. Derek had been assigned as the spotter, responsible for identifying targets and providing environmental data for Emma's shots. It was a role that required absolute trust and communication between team members. However, during the exercise, Derek deliberately provided inaccurate wind calculations and target identification, making accurate shooting nearly impossible. Emma recognized the sabotage almost immediately. Her years of experience had taught her to trust her own environmental assessments over external data when discrepancies arose. She compensated brilliantly, making real-time corrections that showcased not only her technical skill, but her ability to adapt under pressure while maintaining tactical effectiveness. When the exercise concluded, Derek was already constructing his narrative for the debriefing. "She couldn't maintain team coordination," he told Colonel Mitchell with perfectly practiced concern. "I provided standard tactical data, but she kept second-guessing my assessments and making unauthorized adjustments. In a real combat situation, that kind of individualism could compromise the entire mission." Emma stared at Derek in disbelief, recognizing the calculated nature of his deception. His false information had been designed specifically to make her fail, and now he was using her successful adaptation as evidence of poor teamwork. "That's not accurate," Emma began, but Mitchell cut her off with sharp authority. "Are you suggesting that Walsh is providing false information, Rodriguez?" The temperature in the debriefing room seemed to drop as Emma looked around at her fellow candidates, searching for someone who might acknowledge what they had all witnessed. Derek's deliberate sabotage had been obvious to anyone paying attention, but she found only downcast eyes and studied silence. No one was willing to risk their own career prospects to defend her against what was clearly a coordinated effort to force her out of the program. "No, sir," Emma said finally, recognizing that the truth was irrelevant in this context. Corporal Lisa Harper approached Emma after the debriefing, as one of the few people in the program who understood the unique pressures faced by women in elite military roles. "You're shooting better than 3/4 of these guys," she said, quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "But Mitchell made his decision about you before you ever fired your first shot. What am I supposed to do?" Emma asked, the frustration finally showing in her voice despite her efforts to maintain military bearing. Harper's expression was sympathetic but resigned. "Keep your head down, shoot perfect, and maybe you can outlast his prejudice." "But honestly, Emma, I don't think perfect is going to be enough. This system isn't designed to evaluate us fairly. It's designed to confirm what they already believe about who belongs here." Emma was beginning to understand that her technical excellence might be irrelevant in a system determined to validate preconceived notions about mental fitness and military suitability. The program wasn't just testing her marksmanship skills. It was testing whether she could survive in an environment actively hostile to her presence. The final breaking point came during a stress shooting exercise that had eliminated 6 other candidates in previous months. The scenario involved making precision shots under extreme psychological pressure, designed to identify soldiers who might crack under the mental strain of real combat situations. Emma was assigned to a realistic combat simulator that replicated the conditions of urban warfare. The exercise required her to make accurate shots while dealing with simulated civilian casualties, time pressure, and audio recordings of wounded soldiers calling for help. It was designed to be emotionally overwhelming, testing whether candidates could maintain tactical focus despite psychological trauma. Emma approached the exercise with the same methodical precision that had characterized her entire military training. She understood that the psychological pressure was artificial, designed specifically to interfere with rational decision-making. Instead of fighting the emotional manipulation, she acknowledged it and then set it aside, focusing entirely on the tactical requirements of each scenario. Her performance was exceptional by every measurable standard. She maintained perfect accuracy, while making complex ethical decisions about target prioritization. She demonstrated exactly the kind of mental resilience and tactical focus that the exercise was designed to identify. When she emerged from the simulator, Emma felt confident that she had proven her psychological fitness for the most demanding military operations. However, when Colonel Mitchell addressed the assembled candidates after reviewing the exercise results, his expression carried the same predetermined disapproval Emma had learned to expect. "Unacceptable," Mitchell announced to the group, his voice carrying the authority of final judgment. Rodriguez displayed concerning psychological dissociation during high-stress scenarios. Her ability to compartmentalize emotional responses indicates a concerning detachment that could prove dangerous in real combat situations, where empathy and emotional awareness are crucial for mission success. Emma felt her world shift as she processed Mitchell's words. He was criticizing her for exactly the mental discipline that the exercise was supposed to identify and reward. Her ability to maintain focus under pressure, the very quality that made her an exceptional marksman, was being reframed as a psychological deficiency. "Sir, I maintain tactical effectiveness throughout all scenarios, while adhering to all engagement protocols," Emma said, her voice steady despite the surreal nature of defending her strengths as if they were weaknesses. "Your emotional detachment is precisely the problem, Rodriguez," Mitchell continued. "In modern military operations, we need soldiers who can maintain human connection and emotional awareness, not cold-blooded operators who treat combat like a mechanical exercise." The irony was staggering. Emma's ability to remain calm and focused, qualities that had been praised throughout her military training, were now being labeled as signs of mental unfitness. Mitchell had constructed a criticism that would apply regardless of her performance. Too much emotion would make her unstable, while too little emotion made her psychologically dangerous. That evening, Emma was summoned to Mitchell's office in the base administration building. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she stood at attention before his desk, her hands clasped behind her back in perfect military posture. Mitchell didn't look up from his paperwork for several minutes, letting the silence build tension in the small office. "You gave it an honest effort, Rodriguez," he finally said, his voice carrying the tone of false regret that felt rehearsed. "But this program requires a specific psychological profile, and you're simply not suited for the mental demands of elite precision operations. We need soldiers who can balance tactical effectiveness with emotional stability and team integration." Emma's throat felt dry as she prepared to make one final attempt to defend her record. "Sir, I respectfully request specific examples of how my psychological assessment differs from program standards. My shooting accuracy has been consistently superior, and my tactical decision-making has met or exceeded all established benchmarks." Mitchell finally looked up, his expression cold and final. "Your discharge papers will be processed tomorrow morning, Rodriguez. You'll be transferred to a standard training assignment where your skills can be utilized in a more appropriate capacity. This conversation is concluded." Walking back across the base that night, Emma felt something fundamental break inside her chest. Not her spirit that remained intact, but her faith in the military system she had joined to serve. She had given everything to prove her worth, had exceeded every standard they had set, but it had never been about her capabilities. The evaluation process had been designed to reach a predetermined conclusion about her psychological fitness. She packed her gear in silence while her former classmates pretended to sleep, the weight of unspoken sympathy heavy in the mountain air. She had devoted herself completely to earning her place in that elite program, but it was never really about her shooting or her mental toughness. It was about who Colonel Mitchell thought deserved to represent the military's highest standards of precision marksmanship. 2 years later, Emma was teaching basic marksmanship to new recruits at Camp Morrison, a remote training facility in the Arizona desert. It wasn't the career she had envisioned, but it was still military service, and she found genuine satisfaction in helping young soldiers develop the skills that might keep them alive in combat. She had made peace with her circumstances, or at least convinced herself that she had. during the long desert afternoons when advanced military aircraft would streak overhead, leaving her with a hollow reminder of opportunities that had been taken away. Everything changed when Captain Sarah Kim contacted her through official military channels. Sarah had been a graduate of Fort Whitman's program 5 years earlier and was now serving with a classified special operations unit that specialized in precision military actions. She had been following Emma's case through informal networks of female military professionals and had access to Emma's training records from her time at Fort Whitman. "Rodriguez, I need to ask you something directly," Sarah said during their secure video conference. "Are you still the soldier who scored perfect marks on every precision assessment at Whitman?" Emma looked at the camera, uncertain how to respond to a question that touched on such a painful period of her military career. "I'm teaching marksmanship to recruits now, Captain. Nothing more complicated than that." "That's not what I asked," Sarah said with the directness that came from special operations experience. "I've seen your files, Emma. What Mitchell did to you was criminal. But I need to know if you still have the skills, because I've got a situation that requires exactly your kind of precision thinking." Sarah explained that she now worked for a joint special operations task force that handled situations requiring unconventional tactical solutions. The unit operated in the shadows between official military doctrine and practical battlefield necessity, taking on missions that traditional command structures couldn't accommodate. They needed soldiers who could think beyond established protocols, who could adapt to impossible circumstances with split-second precision. "I've been authorized to recruit one additional specialist for a classified operation," Sarah continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen combat situations that didn't exist in any training manual. "We've got a situation developing overseas that requires someone with your specific skill set. Someone who can make impossible shots under conditions that would break most trained snipers." Emma laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Sarah, I was declared mentally unfit for precision operations. Why would anyone trust me with a classified mission?" "Because I've studied your psychological evaluations from Whitman," Sarah replied seriously. "And because I've been in enough real combat situations to know the difference between actual mental instability and the kind of tactical thinking that makes traditional commanders uncomfortable." Mitchell dismissed exactly the qualities that could save lives in the field. Sarah went on to explain that their task force had been monitoring a developing crisis in Afghanistan's Kandahar province, where Taliban forces had established a heavily fortified position in the mountains overlooking forward operating Base Eagle. The enemy position was strategically placed to dominate the entire valley, making it impossible for coalition forces to conduct normal operations or evacuate wounded personnel. Traditional military approaches had been attempted for 6 months without success. Artillery strikes were ineffective due to the enemy's use of natural cave systems and reinforced bunkers. Airstrikes were limited by the proximity of civilian villages and the complex mountain terrain that created dangerous flight conditions. Infantry assaults had been attempted 3 times, resulting in heavy casualties and no tactical gains. "The Taliban position is essentially impregnable using conventional tactics," Sarah explained. "They've got overlapping fields of fire, natural protection from aerial bombardment, and supply lines that we can't effectively interdict. But intelligence suggests there's one specific vulnerability that could change everything." Sarah described how satellite reconnaissance had identified a critical structural weakness in the enemy fortification. A single precision shot, placed at exactly the right location and angle, could trigger a controlled collapse that would neutralize the position, without risking civilian casualties or requiring a costly ground assault. However, the shot would have to be taken from an extreme distance under conditions that push the absolute limits of human marksmanship capability. We're talking about a shot at 2,800 meters through mountain wind conditions with approximately a 30-second window of opportunity, Sarah said. The angle requires compensating for elevation changes that most military calculators can't even process accurately. We need someone who can feel the shot rather than just calculate it. Emma stared at her computer screen, processing the technical requirements Sarah was describing. A shot at that distance and complexity would be at the very edge of what was physically possible with current military equipment. It would require not just exceptional marksmanship, but the kind of intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental conditions that couldn't be taught through standard training. When would this happen? Emma asked, surprised by her own immediate interest in the challenge. We deploy in 72 hours, Sarah said. I need an answer tonight, Emma. This isn't just about proving Mitchell wrong, though that would be a nice bonus. This is about ending a siege that's cost too many lives already, and showing that sometimes the military's greatest asset is the soldiers they think are too different to trust. That night, Emma lay awake in her small quarters at Camp Morrison, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with a decision that could permanently alter her military career. Accepting Sarah's offer meant leaving behind the safety and predictability of her teaching assignment for a mission that carried enormous risks. If anything went wrong, her involvement in a classified operation could end any hope of future military advancement. But somewhere deep in her chest, the same fire that had driven her to excel at Fort Whitman was beginning to rekindle. The opportunity to use her skills for their intended purpose, to make the kind of precision shot that could save lives rather than simply hitting targets, was too compelling to ignore. 3 days later, Emma found herself on a military transport aircraft flying toward a classified staging area in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The security clearance process had been expedited through channels she didn't fully understand, but Sarah's recommendations carried significant weight within the special operations community. Sitting in the cargo area of the aircraft, Emma reviewed the tactical briefings that outlined the complexity of Operation Mountain Strike. The Taliban position they were targeting had been established 18 months earlier and had grown into a sophisticated fortress that controlled access to 3 major valleys. Coalition forces had been unable to conduct effective operations in the region, and the siege of Forward Operating Base Eagle had become a symbol of tactical stalemate. The enemy fighters were experienced and well-equipped, many of them veterans of conflicts stretching back decades. They had chosen their position with careful consideration of both defensive advantages and psychological impact. Every day that the position remained operational demonstrated their ability to challenge coalition military superiority in mountainous terrain. Emma studied satellite imagery and topographical maps that showed the precise location where her shot would need to be placed. The target was a specific structural support beam that intelligence analysts believed would trigger a cascade failure if damaged correctly. However, the beam was only partially visible from the proposed shooting position, and the shot would have to thread through a narrow gap between rock formations that provided natural protection for the enemy position. The margin for error was essentially zero. A shot that was off by even a few inches would either miss the target entirely or hit reinforced sections that could absorb the impact without creating the desired effect. Success would require not just accuracy, but perfect timing to coincide with intelligence about enemy patrol patterns and wind conditions. Landing at the forward staging area, Emma was introduced to the rest of the task force team that would be supporting Operation Mountain Strike. The group was small and specialized, consisting of soldiers who had been selected for their ability to operate independently under extreme conditions. Their commander was Major David Chun, a soft-spoken officer whose quiet competence immediately inspired confidence. Major Chun briefed Emma on the tactical situation with the thoroughness of someone who understood that mission success depended on every team member having complete situational awareness. The enemy position was located on a ridge approximately 4 kilometers from Forward Operating Base Eagle, positioned to observe and interdict any movement in the valley below. They've effectively cut off our supply routes and evacuation capabilities, Chun explained, pointing to overhead imagery. That showed the strategic importance of the Taliban position. Medical helicopters can't reach our wounded, supply convoys are taking constant fire, and morale at the base is deteriorating rapidly. This has become as much a psychological battle as a tactical one. Emma learned that previous attempts to neutralize the position had included precision artillery strikes, guided missile attacks, and even experimental drone operations. Each attempt had failed due to the natural protection provided by the mountain terrain and the sophisticated defensive measures the Taliban fighters had constructed over months of preparation. The beauty of your approach, Chun continued, is that it doesn't rely on overwhelming firepower or complex technological systems. It's elegant in its simplicity. One soldier, one rifle, one perfectly placed shot. But the technical requirements are unlike anything we've attempted before. Emma was introduced to the custom rifle system that had been prepared specifically for the mission. The weapon was a heavily modified version of standard military sniper rifles, enhanced with advanced optics, environmental sensors, and ballistic computers that could process the complex calculations required for extreme distance shooting. However, the technology was only as good as the soldier using it, and at the distances involved, human intuition would ultimately determine success or failure. The team spent 2 days conducting reconnaissance and preparation in the mountains. Near the target area, Emma used the time to familiarize herself with the specific environmental conditions she would face during the actual mission: altitude effects on ballistics, wind patterns created by the mountain terrain, and temperature variations that would affect both equipment performance and atmospheric density. Working with the team's meteorologist, Emma studied detailed weather projections that would help determine the optimal timing for the shot. The window of opportunity was narrow, dependent on wind conditions that occurred only briefly during specific times of day when atmospheric stability created the precise conditions necessary for extreme distance accuracy. You'll have approximately 30 seconds when wind speed drops below acceptable thresholds, the meteorologist explained, showing Emma computer models that predicted atmospheric conditions with military precision. Before and after that window, crosswinds will make accurate shooting impossible at this distance. Emma also spent time studying intelligence, reports about the enemy position and the specific individuals they would be targeting. The Taliban commanders who had established the fortification were experienced fighters who understood both the tactical and propaganda value of their strategic position. They had invested significant resources in creating a position that seemed immune to traditional military solutions. This isn't just about tactical success, Major Chun told Emma during one of their planning sessions. This operation has political implications that extend far beyond our immediate military objectives. Success will demonstrate that coalition forces can adapt and overcome any defensive position, while failure will reinforce perceptions that we're unable to deal with sophisticated enemy tactics. The pressure was enormous, but Emma found herself responding to the challenge with the same focused determination that had characterized her entire military career. She understood that this mission would define not only her own future in the military, but potentially influence tactical doctrine for special operations units facing similar challenges. On the night before the operation, Emma performed final equipment checks and reviewed every aspect of the mission plan. The technical requirements were daunting: a shot at nearly 3 kilometers through mountain air, compensating for elevation differences, wind variations, and timing constraints that demanded split-second precision. But she felt the familiar calm that had served her since childhood, the quiet confidence that came from knowing she possessed the skills necessary to accomplish what others considered impossible. Major Chun approached her as she completed her preparations, his expression reflecting both confidence in her abilities and awareness of the enormous responsibility she carried. "Rodriguez, I want you to know that every person on this team volunteered specifically to work with you on this mission," he said quietly. "We've all read your files from Fort Whitman, and we understand what you've been through. Tomorrow isn't just about ending a siege. It's about proving that the military's greatest assets are sometimes the soldiers who don't fit traditional molds." Emma nodded, understanding the broader implications of what they were attempting. Success would vindicate not only her own capabilities, but the value of unconventional thinking in military operations. It would demonstrate that soldiers who had been dismissed as mentally unfit might actually possess exactly the qualities needed for the most challenging missions. "I appreciate the confidence, sir," Emma replied. "But tomorrow, it's just going to be about making one good shot when it counts." As dawn approached, the team moved into their final positions for Operation Mountain Strike. Emma found herself on a rocky outcropping that provided clear lines of sight to the target area while offering natural concealment from enemy observation. The position was approximately 2,800 meters from the Taliban fortification, at the very edge of effective rifle range even under ideal conditions. Setting up her equipment, Emma felt the familiar ritual of precision shooting take over her thoughts. Every movement was deliberate and practiced, from the positioning of her rifle to the adjustment of her optics for the specific environmental conditions they faced. The advanced ballistic computer provided mathematical calculations, but Emma trusted her own intuitive understanding of how bullets behaved in mountain air. The Taliban position was visible through her scope as a series of reinforced bunkers and fighting positions carved into the natural rock formations. Intelligence had identified this specific structural beam that represented their target, but from her shooting position, only a small portion of the beam was visible through the narrow gap between protective rock barriers. Emma studied wind indicators and atmospheric conditions while waiting for the optimal shooting window. Mountain winds were notoriously unpredictable, shifting direction and intensity based on thermal currents and topographical features that could change from minute to minute. Success would require not just accurate shooting, but perfect timing to coincide with the brief moments when conditions aligned. Through her radio headset, Emma received updates from the team's forward observers who were monitoring enemy activity and environmental conditions. The Taliban fighters were following their normal patrol routines, unaware that they were being observed by coalition forces positioned for a precision strike. Wind conditions approaching optimal parameters, came the voice of the meteorologist through her earpiece. Estimate 45 seconds until ideal shooting window opens. Emma settled into her shooting position, feeling her heart rate slow. As she entered the focused mental state that had made her exceptional throughout her military career. This was the moment that would define everything, her own future, the success of the mission, and the lives of coalition soldiers who had been trapped by the siege for 6 months. The target area through her scope showed no movement, but Emma knew that dozens of enemy fighters were positioned throughout the fortified complex. A successful shot would not only neutralize their defensive position, but would demonstrate that no fortification was impregnable when faced with the right combination of skill, technology, and tactical innovation. Wind window opening now came. The meteorologist's voice. 30 seconds of optimal conditions beginning. Now. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that had served her since childhood settle over her thoughts. In 30 seconds, she would either vindicate her entire military career or face another devastating failure that would end any hope of proving her worth as a precision marksman. But in this moment, surrounded by teammates who believed in her abilities and facing a challenge that demanded everything she had learned about marksmanship, Emma felt exactly where she belonged. The crosshairs of her scope settled on the narrow target area, and Emma began the final calculations that would determine whether months of planning and preparation would result in mission success. Through her earpiece, she could hear the quiet breathing of her teammates, all of them understanding that the next few seconds would determine the outcome of Operation Mountain Strike. Emma's finger found the trigger, and she felt the familiar weight of a decision that would change everything. In the distance, the Taliban fortification waited, unaware that their months of tactical dominance were about to end with a single, perfectly placed shot from a soldier who had been declared mentally unfit for precision operations. The mountain. Air was still, the target was clear, and Emma Rodriguez was exactly where she had always belonged, behind a rifle, ready to make the shot that mattered most. Emma controlled her breathing as the optimal wind window opened, feeling every environmental factor aligned for what would either be the most significant shot of her military career or a devastating failure witnessed by special operations commanders from 3 different nations. Through her scope, the target beam appeared as a thin line barely visible between rock formations, requiring her to thread a bullet through a gap that provided less than 6 inches of clearance on either side. The ballistic computer displayed calculations that pushed the boundaries of what current technology could accurately predict. At 2,800 meters, bullet drop exceeded 40 feet, requiring Emma to aim at a point in empty sky that seemed completely disconnected from her actual target. Environmental factors created additional complications. The altitude affected air density. Mountain terrain generated unpredictable wind currents and temperature differentials between her position and the target area would influence the bullet's trajectory in ways that mathematics could only approximate. Emma had studied every aspect of this shot for weeks, but ultimately success would depend on the intuitive understanding of ballistics that had made her exceptional since childhood. She trusted her ability to feel the shot more than any computer. Calculation, understanding that at these extreme distances, human instinct became more valuable than technological precision. Through her earpiece, Emma heard Major Chun's voice providing final coordination with other elements of the operation. Intelligence teams were monitoring Taliban communications to ensure that enemy fighters remained in their normal positions. Artillery units were standing by to provide covering fire if the precision strike failed and a traditional assault became necessary. Medical teams at Forward Operating Base Eagle were prepared to begin immediate evacuation operations if the siege was successfully broken. All stations, this is strike control, came Chun's calm voice through the tactical radio network. Sniper is in position and ready to engage. Weather window is optimal. All supporting elements report ready status. Emma felt the familiar calm that had characterized every important shot throughout her career, but she also understood that this moment carried implications far beyond her personal vindication. Coalition forces had been trapped at Forward Operating Base Eagle for 6 months, unable to conduct normal operations or evacuate seriously wounded personnel. The Taliban position had become a symbol of tactical stalemate, demonstrating enemy capability to establish defensive positions that traditional military approaches couldn't overcome. Success would prove that unconventional thinking and individual excellence could accomplish what massive technological superiority had failed to achieve. Failure would likely result in a costly ground assault that could produce heavy casualties while reinforcing perceptions that coalition forces lacked effective solutions for sophisticated enemy defensive tactics. The crosshairs in Emma's scope settled on the precise point where intelligence analysts believed her bullet needed to impact. The target was a structural support beam that appeared to be integral to the overall stability of the Taliban's fortified position. A successful hit would trigger a controlled collapse that would neutralize the defensive position without creating casualties among nearby civilian populations. Emma began her final breathing sequence, slowing her heart rate and entering the focused mental state that eliminated all external distractions. The sounds of mountain wind, radio communications, and equipment operation faded into background noise as her entire consciousness narrowed to the relationship between her rifle, the target, and the environmental factors that would determine bullet trajectory. Weather holding steady, came the meteorologist's voice. Wind speed 2 miles per hour from the northwest. Atmospheric pressure stable. You have green light for engagement. Emma's finger found the trigger with the muscle memory developed through thousands of practice shots, but she held her fire for several additional seconds, waiting for the perfect moment when every factor aligned. At this distance, timing was as critical as aim, requiring her to coordinate her shot with brief fluctuations in wind speed and atmospheric conditions that occurred in patterns too subtle for instruments to detect. Reliably. Through the scope, Emma could see activity in the Taliban position as fighters conducted their normal patrol routines, unaware that their months of tactical dominance were about to end. The fortification showed obvious signs of sophisticated planning and construction, with overlapping fields of fire, protected supply routes, and defensive positions that had successfully withstood previous coalition attempts at neutralization. Emma understood that the enemy fighters were skilled and experienced, many of them veterans who had survived decades of conflict in some of the world's most challenging terrain. They had chosen this position specifically because it provided maximum defensive advantage while demonstrating their ability to challenge coalition military superiority. Defeating them required not just superior firepower, but tactical innovation that went beyond traditional military doctrine. The moment felt perfect, with every environmental indicator showing optimal conditions for extreme distance shooting. Emma's breathing reached the natural pause between inhalation and exhalation. Her heart rate had slowed to its minimum sustainable level, and the crosshairs held steady on the target point, despite the natural body movement that affected all human marksmen. Emma squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure that had been drilled into her through years of training, feeling the rifle's recoil as the bullet began its journey toward a target nearly 3 kilometers away. The shot felt perfect from the moment of firing, with every aspect of her technique executing exactly as practiced during countless hours of preparation. However, at extreme distances, bullet flight time created an agonizing wait between firing and impact. Emma's bullet would take approximately 4 seconds to reach the target, during which time wind conditions, atmospheric pressure, or even minor temperature changes could affect the trajectory enough to cause a miss. She maintained her shooting position, tracking the bullet's predicted path through her scope while waiting for confirmation of impact. Through her earpiece, Emma heard the voices of forward observers who were positioned to monitor the target area and report results immediately. The radio frequency remained silent during the bullet's flight time, creating a tension that affected every member of the operation team who understood the implications of success or failure. Impact, came the voice of the primary observer, followed immediately by a pause that lasted long enough to make Emma's heart race with uncertainty about the results of her shot. Direct hit on target structure, the observer continued, his voice carrying excitement that broke through professional military composure, initiating secondary collapse as predicted. Enemy position is compromised and fighters are evacuating. Emma watched through her scope as the precision strike achieved exactly the results that intelligence analysts had predicted. The structural beam she had targeted was severed cleanly, triggering a cascade failure that compromised the integrity of the entire fortified position. Rock formations that had provided natural protection began collapsing in a controlled manner that neutralized defensive capabilities without creating the massive destruction that would have resulted from conventional bombardment. Taliban fighters could be seen evacuating their positions as the fortification became untenable, abandoning equipment and supplies that they had accumulated during months of siege operations. The collapse was happening gradually enough to allow personnel evacuation, minimizing casualties while achieving the tactical objective of neutralizing the defensive position. All stations, this is strike control. Major Chun's voice came through the radio network with barely contained satisfaction. Mission objective achieved. Target neutralized with precision strike. Forward Operating Base Eagle, you are cleared to begin evacuation operations. The immediate response from Forward Operating Base Eagle was a mixture of relief and celebration that could be heard even through the professional discipline of military radio communications. Coalition forces who had been trapped for 6 months could finally begin evacuating wounded personnel and resupplying their positions without facing constant enemy fire from the mountain ridge. Emma remained in her shooting position for several additional minutes, continuing to observe the target area while other team members began their withdrawal procedures. She watched Taliban fighters completing their evacuation of the collapsed position, noting that they were moving with the disciplined retreat of experienced military personnel rather than the panic that might have resulted from a surprise assault. The enemy fighters had been outmaneuvered tactically, but they remained dangerous opponents who would likely establish new defensive positions elsewhere in the region. Emma's successful shot had solved an immediate tactical problem, but it was part of a larger conflict that would continue requiring innovative solutions and exceptional individual performance. Major Chun approached Emma's position as she began packing her equipment, his expression reflecting both professional satisfaction and personal admiration for what she had accomplished. The shot had succeeded beyond their most optimistic predictions, achieving immediate tactical results while demonstrating the value of unconventional approaches to seemingly impossible military challenges. Rodriguez, that was one of the finest pieces of marksmanship I've witnessed in 22 years of military service, Chun said quietly, understanding that Emma's achievement extended far beyond the immediate mission success. You just proved that sometimes the most complex problems require the simplest solutions, executed with exceptional skill. Emma felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication or professional recognition. She had used her abilities for their intended purpose, making a precision shot that saved lives rather than simply demonstrating technical proficiency. The shot had ended a siege that was costing coalition forces casualties and resources while proving that individual excellence could accomplish what massive technological superiority had failed to achieve. As the team began their extraction from the mountain position, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years earlier, she had been dismissed from Fort Whitman's elite program as mentally unfit for precision operations. Colonel Mitchell had declared her psychological approach to marksmanship incompatible with military requirements, forcing her into a teaching role that seemed to represent the end of her aspirations for elite military service. Now she had completed a mission that would be studied in special operations training programs and cited as an example of how unconventional thinking could solve tactical problems that defeated traditional approaches. The same qualities that Mitchell had criticized as dangerous psychological detachment had enabled her to maintain focus under extreme pressure while making calculations that pushed the limits of human marksmanship capability. The extraction helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, with pilots who had been briefed on the mission's success and understood the significance of what Emma had accomplished. As the aircraft lifted off from the mountain landing zone, Emma caught a final glimpse of the Taliban position she had neutralized, noting that coalition forces were already moving to secure the area and prevent enemy reoccupation. During the flight back to their forward staging area, Major Chun provided Emma with preliminary reports about the mission's immediate impact. Forward Operating Base Eagle had already begun evacuating wounded personnel who had been trapped for months, including several soldiers whose medical conditions had been deteriorating due to limited treatment capabilities. Supply convoys were being organized to resupply the base with equipment and materials that had been impossible to deliver during the siege. The psychological impact might be even more important than the immediate tactical gains, Chun explained over the helicopter's engine noise. This operation demonstrates that coalition forces can adapt and overcome any defensive position, regardless of how sophisticated or well-established it appears. That message will influence enemy tactical planning throughout the region. Emma understood that her successful shot would have implications extending far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Special operations commanders would study the mission as an example of how individual excellence could be leveraged to solve complex problems that defeated conventional military approaches. Her success would influence training programs, equipment development, and tactical doctrine for precision operations in challenging environments. More personally, Emma realized that she had finally found the military role she had been seeking. Since her first enlistment, special operations offered opportunities to use her abilities at their highest level while working with teammates who valued innovation and individual excellence rather than conformity to rigid institutional standards. She had discovered a military community that appreciated exactly the key qualities that had made her unsuccessful in traditional programs. The helicopter touched down at the staging area where intelligence personnel were already analyzing the mission's results and preparing reports for higher command levels. Emma's shot had been recorded by multiple observation systems, providing detailed documentation of both the technical execution and the tactical results. The footage would become part of military archives while serving as training material for future precision marksmanship programs. As Emma completed her post-mission debriefing and equipment inspection, she received word that General Patricia Stone, the theater commander responsible for coalition operations in the region, had requested a personal meeting to discuss her performance and potential future assignments. General Stone had a reputation for identifying and developing exceptional military talent, particularly soldiers whose abilities didn't fit traditional organizational structures. "Rodriguez, you've just solved a tactical problem that had frustrated some of our best strategic minds for 6 months," General Stone said during their meeting. "I want to discuss how we can best utilize your capabilities going forward, because it's clear that conventional assignments aren't appropriate for someone with your skill level." Emma felt a sense of professional recognition that had been absent from her military experience since leaving Fort Whitman. General Stone understood that exceptional soldiers required exceptional opportunities, and she was prepared to provide the kind of challenging assignments that would allow Emma to continue developing her abilities while serving at the highest levels of military operations. "I'm interested in whatever opportunities best serve the mission, General," Emma replied, understanding that her successful completion of Operation Mountain Strike had opened doors that had seemed permanently closed. After her dismissal from the elite marksmanship program, General Stone outlined several potential assignments that would allow Emma to continue working with special operations units while taking on increasingly complex precision marksmanship challenges. The military had recognized that soldiers like Emma represented valuable assets that couldn't be developed through traditional training programs, requiring instead specialized career paths that maximize their unique capabilities. "Your success today proves that our most valuable soldiers are sometimes the ones who don't fit conventional molds," General Stone continued. "We're developing new programs specifically designed to identify and develop exceptional individual talent, and I'd like you to be part of that effort." Emma realized that her military career had reached a turning point that would define not only her own future but potentially influence how the military identified and developed unconventional talent. Her success had demonstrated the value of soldiers who approached challenges differently, thinking beyond established protocols to find innovative solutions for complex problems. As news of Operation Mountain Strike's success spread through military channels, Emma began receiving recognition from unexpected sources. Former classmates from Fort Whitman, who had witnessed her dismissal, reached out with congratulations and expressions of vindication for what they had known about her abilities. Even some officers who had remained silent during her conflicts with Colonel Mitchell acknowledged that her treatment had been unfair and counterproductive. Most significantly, Emma received a formal commendation that would become part of her permanent military record, officially recognizing her exceptional performance and tactical innovation. The commendation specifically noted that her success had been achieved using qualities that traditional evaluation methods had failed to recognize, suggesting that military assessment procedures needed revision to identify soldiers with similar potential. The recognition felt satisfying, but Emma understood that her real vindication came from the mission's success rather than official acknowledgement. She had proven to herself that her approach to precision marksmanship was not only valid but superior to conventional methods when facing the most challenging tactical situations. Her confidence in her own abilities had been completely restored, along with her faith in the military's capacity to recognize and utilize exceptional talent when properly managed. That evening, as Emma completed her final paperwork related to Operation Mountain Strike, she reflected on the transformation that had occurred since Captain Sarah Kim's initial contact. She had rediscovered her sense of purpose and professional identity, while proving that the qualities which had led to her dismissal were actually her greatest strengths when applied to appropriate challenges. Emma understood that her journey was far from over, but she now possessed the confidence and institutional support necessary to continue developing her abilities while serving at the highest levels of military operations. She had found her place in a military community that valued innovation and individual excellence, surrounded by teammates who understood that exceptional soldiers required exceptional opportunities to reach their full potential. 6 months after Operation Mountain Strike, Emma found herself standing before the assembled faculty and students of Fort Whitman's elite precision training program, invited to deliver the keynote address at their annual symposium on advanced marksmanship techniques. The invitation had come directly from the Pentagon, part of a broader initiative to examine how military training programs could better identify and develop unconventional talent. The irony of returning to speak at the institution that had declared her mentally unfit was not lost on Emma, but her perspective had evolved significantly since her dismissal. She no longer harbored anger toward Colonel Mitchell or the system that had rejected her. Instead, she understood that her experience represented a valuable case study in how rigid institutional thinking could overlook exceptional capabilities that didn't conform to established patterns. As Emma prepared her presentation in the same briefing hall where she had once faced Mitchell's skeptical evaluation, she reflected on the journey that had brought her back to Fort Whitman. Operation Mountain Strike had become legendary within special operations circles, studied as an example of how individual excellence could solve tactical problems that defeated conventional approaches. Her precision shot had been analyzed by ballistics experts, meteorologists, and tactical planners who marveled at the technical execution and strategic impact. More importantly, Emma had spent the intervening months working with General Stone's newly established exceptional talent development program, helping to create assessment methods that could identify soldiers with capabilities that traditional evaluation systems missed. Her experience had contributed to fundamental changes in how the military approached talent identification and career development for unconventional performers. Emma's current assignment was developing training protocols for extreme distance precision operations, working with soldiers who demonstrated exceptional marksmanship potential but struggled with conventional military structures. She had become an advocate for alternative evaluation methods that emphasized results over conformity, helping other soldiers avoid the kind of institutional rejection she had experienced. The audience at Fort Whitman included many familiar faces. From Emma's time as a student, fellow candidates who had witnessed her conflicts with Colonel Mitchell and her eventual dismissal. Some had gone on to successful careers in traditional military roles, while others had struggled with the program's rigid requirements despite possessing genuine tactical abilities. Their presence reminded Emma of how many talented soldiers might be lost to institutional inflexibility. Colonel Mitchell was also in attendance, Now nearing retirement and facing questions about his training methodologies from Pentagon officials who were examining the program's effectiveness in developing soldiers for modern combat challenges. His presence added weight to Emma's presentation, creating an opportunity for direct dialogue about the institutional changes her experience had helped inspire. Emma began her address by acknowledging the complexity of military talent development, recognizing that institutional standards served important purposes while also noting that exceptional capabilities often emerged in unexpected ways. She emphasized that her experience at Fort Whitman had been valuable despite its painful conclusion, providing lessons that had ultimately made her a more effective soldier and leader. "My time here taught me that excellence comes in many forms," Emma said, looking directly at the assembled students who represented the next generation of military marksmen. "The challenge for any institution is recognizing when unconventional approaches might actually represent superior solutions to tactical problems that defeat traditional methods." Emma described Operation Mountain Strike in detail, explaining how the mission's success had required exactly the kind of intuitive decision-making and psychological resilience that her original evaluation had criticized. She outlined the technical challenges of extreme distance shooting, emphasizing how mathematical calculations could only approximate the complex environmental factors that ultimately determined success or failure. "The shot that ended the siege required me to trust my instincts more than any ballistic computer," Emma explained. At 2,800 meters, with mountain winds and atmospheric conditions that changed by the second, success depended on the kind of intuitive understanding that can't be programmed or taught through conventional methods. The audience listened with rapt attention as Emma described the psychological demands of the mission, including the pressure of knowing that failure would result in continued casualties at forward operating base Eagle and potentially require a costly ground assault. She explained how her ability to maintain focus under extreme stress, the same quality that had been labeled as dangerous psychological detachment, had enabled her to execute the precision shot that traditional approaches couldn't accomplish. Emma also addressed the broader implications of her experience, discussing how military institutions could better balance the need for discipline and conformity with recognition of exceptional individual capabilities. She outlined assessment methods that could identify soldiers with unconventional potential while providing them with appropriate development opportunities rather than forcing them into roles that didn't utilize their strengths. "The military's greatest asset is the diversity of talent within its ranks," Emma continued. "Our challenge is creating systems that can recognize and develop that talent in all its forms, rather than dismissing capabilities that don't fit established patterns." During the question and answer session, Emma fielded inquiries from students who were struggling with similar challenges to those she had faced during her time at Fort Whitman. Many described feeling like their natural approaches to marksmanship didn't align with institutional expectations, creating internal conflicts about whether to conform or maintain their individual methods. Emma encouraged them to find ways to excel within military structures while maintaining confidence in their unique capabilities. She emphasized that institutional standards served important purposes, but that exceptional soldiers often needed to find creative ways to demonstrate their value through results rather than conformity to established protocols. One student asked directly about Emma's relationship with Colonel Mitchell and whether she harbored resentment about her treatment during the program. Emma's response reflected the maturity and perspective she had gained through her subsequent experiences and success. "Colonel Mitchell was doing his job as he understood it," Emma replied. "His evaluation methods were designed to identify soldiers who would fit seamlessly into existing operational frameworks. The problem wasn't his assessment of my capabilities, but rather the assumption that all valuable military talent must conform to a single model of excellence." Emma went on to explain how her experience had ultimately been beneficial, forcing her to develop resilience and self-confidence while eventually leading to opportunities that were better suited to her unique capabilities. She noted that conventional career paths within the military might never have provided the challenges and growth opportunities she had found through special operations. After her formal presentation, Emma was approached by Colonel Mitchell, who had remained silent during the public discussion, but clearly wanted to engage in private conversation. Their interaction represented the first direct communication they had shared since Emma's dismissal from the program 2.5 years earlier. "Rodriguez," Mitchell said, his voice carrying a complexity of emotions that suggested significant reflection about their past interactions. "That was an exceptional presentation. Your analysis of talent development challenges was insightful and professionally delivered." Emma looked at the man who had once declared her mentally unfit for precision operations, recognizing that he appeared genuinely interested in understanding how his evaluation methods might be improved. His willingness to engage suggested that institutional learning was possible, even for officers who had spent decades developing fixed approaches to talent assessment. "Thank you, Colonel," Emma replied. "I hope my experience can contribute to better outcomes for future students who might not fit traditional models but still have valuable capabilities to offer." Mitchell nodded slowly, clearly grappling with the implications of Emma's success for his own understanding of effective evaluation methods. "I've been reviewing your original assessments and comparing them to your subsequent performance record. It's clear that my evaluation missed something significant about your potential." Emma appreciated Mitchell's honesty and willingness to acknowledge that his original assessment had been incomplete, but she also wanted to emphasize that institutional change required more than individual recognition of past mistakes. Effective reform would need systematic changes to evaluation methods and career development approaches. "The challenge isn't just recognizing exceptional talent after the fact," Emma said. "It's creating assessment methods that can identify unconventional capabilities in real time and provide appropriate development opportunities rather than forcing square pegs into round holes." Mitchell asked specific questions about Emma's current work with the Exceptional Talent Development Program, showing genuine interest in understanding how military institutions could better identify and develop soldiers with capabilities that didn't conform to established patterns. His questions suggested that he was seriously considering how to modify his own training methods to avoid missing valuable talent. Their conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering topics ranging from assessment methodology to the psychological demands of precision operations under extreme conditions. Emma found herself respecting Mitchell's willingness to engage with challenging questions about his own professional methods, recognizing that institutional change required exactly this kind of self-examination from experienced leaders. As their discussion concluded, Mitchell made a statement that represented a fundamental shift in his understanding of effective talent development. "Rodriguez, I want you to know that your experience here has influenced changes to our evaluation protocols. We're implementing assessment methods that provide multiple pathways for demonstrating excellence, rather than requiring all students to conform to a single model." Emma felt a deep satisfaction hearing that her experience had contributed to systemic changes that would benefit future students. The institutional recognition that exceptional talent came in various forms represented exactly the kind of progress she had hoped to achieve through her advocacy work with the Exceptional Talent Development Program. Later that evening, Emma attended a reception where she had opportunities to reconnect with former classmates and meet current students who were interested in unconventional career paths within military special operations. Many expressed appreciation for her willingness to share her experience and provide guidance for navigating institutional challenges while maintaining confidence in their unique capabilities. Corporal Mike Chen, who had been one of the few students to maintain friendly relations with Emma during her time at Fort Whitman, approached her during the reception with news about his own career development. He had struggled with the program's conventional requirements, but had eventually found success in military intelligence roles that utilized his analytical thinking and attention to detail. "Your presentation today gave me language to describe what I experienced here," Chun told Emma. "I always knew there was a mismatch between my capabilities and the program's expectations, but I couldn't articulate why that didn't necessarily mean I was deficient as a soldier." Emma's conversation with Chun reminded her that institutional change required not only new policies and procedures, but also cultural shifts that would help individual soldiers understand that diverse approaches to excellence were valuable rather than problematic. Her advocacy work was contributing to both systematic and cultural changes that would benefit future generations of military personnel. As the evening progressed, Emma reflected on how dramatically her relationship with Fort Whitman had evolved since her dismissal. She no longer viewed the institution as an opponent or source of professional trauma, but rather as a learning laboratory where important questions about talent development and institutional effectiveness could be explored and addressed. Emma's current assignment with the Exceptional Talent Development Program had given her opportunities to work with senior military leaders who were genuinely committed to improving how the armed forces identified and developed unconventional talent. Her experience at Fort Whitman had become a valuable case study, but her ongoing work was focused on creating positive outcomes for current and future soldiers rather than relitigating past conflicts. The following morning, Emma met with General Stone, who had traveled to Fort Whitman specifically to observe her presentation and discuss the broader implications of the Exceptional Talent Development Program. General Stone had become a strong advocate for institutional changes that would better utilize the full spectrum of military talent, and Emma's work had been instrumental in developing new approaches. "Rodriguez, your presentation yesterday accomplished something I've been trying to achieve for years," General Stone said during their private meeting. "You provided concrete evidence that institutional flexibility can enhance rather than compromise military effectiveness." Emma understood that her advocacy work was contributing to changes that extended far beyond individual career development, influencing broader questions about how military institutions could adapt to evolving tactical challenges while maintaining the discipline and cohesion necessary for effective operations. General Stone outlined several opportunities for Emma to expand her work with the Exceptional Talent Development Program, including assignments that would allow her to influence talent development policies at the highest levels of military leadership. Her unique perspective as someone who had experienced both institutional rejection and exceptional success made her particularly valuable for bridging the gap between traditional military culture and innovative approaches to excellence. "Your experience demonstrates that our most valuable soldiers are sometimes the ones who challenge our assumptions about what military excellence looks like," General Stone continued. "We need leaders who can help institutions evolve while maintaining the standards that make military service effective." Emma accepted additional responsibilities that would allow her to continue advocating for systemic changes while working directly with soldiers who possessed exceptional capabilities that didn't fit conventional molds. Her role would involve both policy development and individual mentoring, helping to create pathways for unconventional talent while supporting soldiers who were navigating institutional challenges. As Emma prepared to leave Fort Whitman, she visited the shooting range where she had first demonstrated the exceptional marksmanship abilities that had brought her to the attention of military recruiters. The facility remained unchanged, but her perspective on what had transpired there had evolved significantly through her subsequent experiences and professional growth. Standing at the firing line where she had once faced Colonel Mitchell's skeptical evaluation, Emma felt a profound sense of completion and transformation. She no longer needed validation from the institution that had once rejected her, because she had found her place within military service through opportunities that better matched her unique capabilities. Emma's journey had taught her that institutional rejection didn't necessarily indicate personal deficiency. but rather highlighted the need for organizations to develop more sophisticated methods for recognizing and developing diverse forms of excellence. Her experience had contributed to positive changes that would benefit future soldiers, while providing her with opportunities to serve at the highest levels of military operations. The precision shot that had ended the siege at Forward Operating Base Eagle had been more than a tactical success. It had been a demonstration that exceptional capabilities could emerge in unexpected forms, and that military effectiveness was enhanced rather than compromised by recognizing and developing unconventional talent. As Emma left Fort Whitman for what would likely be her final visit as anything other than an honored guest and institutional reformer, she carried with her a deep appreciation for the complexity of military talent development and the ongoing challenges of balancing institutional standards with recognition of individual excellence. Her story had become more than personal vindication. It had evolved into a case study for institutional learning and a catalyst for positive changes that would benefit countless future soldiers. Emma had found her purpose not in proving her critics wrong, but in using her experience to help create military institutions that could better recognize and develop the full spectrum of human talent in service of national defense. The transformation was complete. Emma Rodriguez had evolved from a rejected candidate into a leader whose influence would shape how the military identified and developed exceptional talent for generations to come. Her precision strike had ended more than a siege. It had opened new pathways for soldiers whose greatest strengths might not conform to traditional expectations, but whose contributions were essential for military effectiveness in an evolving world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.